Hello, everyone. I'm Polalem with Poets and Quants, and welcome to our weekly podcast, Business Casual. I'm joined by my co-hosts Maria Wickvilla and Caroline DRT Edwards. Maria, as you know, is the founder of Applicant Lab, and Caroline, of course, was head of admissions for INSEAD and is co-founder of Fortuna Admissions. So I'm joining you today from London, and I'm really, really glad to be back. Not that France is a horrible place, but Paris last week was hot. Really, really hot. And Maria is still wandering the globe, comes to us this week from New York, and Caroline joins us from sunny California. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm still here in the Bay Area.
Great. So we will be talking today about GMAT Superscores. And I feel like we kind of need to do a little bit of a trumpeting sound here, like doo-doo-doo, the GMAT Superscore.
Does sound good.
I mean, I just had to. But so basically, these are the aggregate best scores of your GMAT test if you sat the test multiple times. And as a reminder, I think everyone listening will know this, but the GMAT is the dominant assessment in the field, and it's accepted by more than 7,500 programs and upwards of 2,400 business schools worldwide. For a second there, I was going to say 24,000, but that's far too many business schools. So these Superscores are set to launch in early August, and this tool will basically appear in candidates' accounts and on their official score reports, which get sent to schools. So basically, if you're a candidate, your strongest verbal score from one sitting can be paired with, say, your strongest quant score from another, producing a higher overall result than a single test date would get you. But before we talk more deeply about this and what it means, I just want to quickly describe how it looks for our listeners. So on their site, GMAC, the body behind GMAT, has this nifty little mock-up of the Superscore on paper. So basically, it's like this new section above your test dates with the overall score. And the comparison's been made, and it feels a lot to me like what the SAT and the ACT have done for ages in undergraduate admissions. So GMAC says it's introducing the Superscore to allay score anxiety. So they say this is, quote, one of the most significant challenges keeping qualified candidates from sending their scores. That ties in nicely to what we were talking about last week, which is waivers offered by some business schools. So the option to basically opt out of taking these tests. But if we look at this as a business move, it's worth noting that GMAT is facing something of an existential crisis. So in 2025, its test volumes fell by 19%. So that's quite significant. All right. That's enough intro from me. So to kick off our discussion, can I just get from each of you a one-word answer, no nuance just yet? GMAT Superscore, good or bad? Caroline.
Good. Why not?
Maria?
Good. Sure.
Okay, that felt
I know
like
that was more than one word. Sorry, we both broke the rules, but
you did. I was thinking that. I wasn't going to say it. So
I think it was an unbounded enthusiasm from either of us.
Right. So I mean, I've already kind of made that cynical note that this is a clever move for GMAC. They're giving candidates this incentive to take the test more times, i.e. they get to cash in more fees. What do you make of that, Maria, in light of the overall good answer that you gave?
yeah, I think it's good for candidates who maybe had an off day on one of the sections on one of the tests. But I think it's mostly good for GMAC in that I think it encourages people to keep trying with the sense of, well, maybe if I just focus on getting a little bit higher score in the verbal or a little bit higher score in the quant, that will in some way benefit the super score, as opposed to having the pressure of, okay, if I do a retake now, both of my sections need to be just as strong, if not stronger, to merit the retake. Now with the Superscore, I can rationalize retaking because I think to myself, well, as long as I do better on one of the two sections, my Superscore overall will be enhanced. So I think the ultimate winner in this would be GMAT, if anyone, because I think it's going to encourage more people to take more tests. And I also believe, and this is a little bit more of a nuance, but I think I saw somewhere that they said that Superscore would only appear in the official score result. I think frequently sometimes candidates will download an unofficial score report and send it with their application. And the official score reports, you get 5 of them for free, but then if you want extra ones sent at different times, you have to pay extra for those. You know, on the grand scheme of things, I think it's $35 per score report on a $250 test. So we're not talking about a major financial hurdle. But if that's the case, that it only appears in the official score report, now I might have to find myself, if my Superscore does make me look better, then I might need to pay for that extra official report to be sent. But those are mechanics that I'm just guessing.
Yeah, and Caroline, I mean, I welcome any thoughts you have on that, and you know, the good rating from you, but also, can you give us some examples of how this is used in admissions, kind of on the school end of things?
Yeah, so I think it's important for candidates to keep in mind that this is not really going to change how schools evaluate your GMAT score. So it's more a matter of presentation. And I think it will be a boost to some candidates, and at least in their confidence when they submit their score report. And I think, you know, that was one of the reasons that GMAT gave for making this move, is that candidates are concerned about their test and their testing history. And this is a nice way of packaging a test report where you've taken multiple tests, and maybe you've done well in the quant one day, you've done better on the verbal in another test. And so it packages it all together nicely and makes your score look better than it actually was. So this isn't going to fool schools. And so in practice, schools do in any case look across your history of test taking. And I've always encouraged candidates, if you have, for example, done really well in the quant on one test, and not so well on the verbal or data insights, and then scored better on the other sections in another test, I have always advised them to submit both of those tests, right? Because you can choose which tests you submit to the schools, because the schools do look across the history. They're not just looking at the headline number, they are looking at the breakdown. And so they have, if you've submitted multiple tests, they are looking at your history of test taking and whether you've managed to reach a certain threshold in the quant and in the verbal and in data insights. So although they wouldn't call it super scoring, they are still taking that holistic perspective into account of your full test taking history. And so, for example, at INSEAD, we like to see a minimum threshold of around 75th percentile on each section of the test. And if a candidate had not reached that threshold on one test in one section, but they had reached it on another test in that section, then it would give us some reassurance that they had that ability. All right, because you're looking to the GMAT to check that they have the academic ability required to flourish in the program. And schools also particularly look at the quantitative score, because there is a strong correlation between how people do on that quantitative section and then how people do on the quantitative courses on an MBA program. So I would say that there's a bit more weight given to that part of the test. So presenting that breakdown has always been useful. So schools are very aware of how that breakdown works, and they are not going to now look at the Superscore and assess the candidate's academic background any differently. So whilst it may give more confidence to candidates, I think there's also a risk that candidates think, okay, I can just like ace the quant on one test and I'll ace the verbal on another, and then I'll ace data insights in another, and that's going to give me a fantastic Superscore. But their actual individual test results don't have such a good total. And what you need to keep in mind is that schools still like to see a strong total, right? So while they will look at the breakdown on the margins, if they're choosing between two different candidates, and of course it never just comes down to the GMAT, but it does look more impressive to get that strong score in one sitting, because it shows that you are able to handle the pressure across that sustained length of time in the test and do well in one sitting. And so it does show there is a marginal benefit to having a strong test result in one sitting. And so, and also something to keep in mind is that schools have to use one single sitting for the reporting. So they can't use the Superscores in their reporting of their average GMAT scores on the program, for example. So there is a limit to the benefit of the Superscore, and candidates just need to be aware that they should not be taking the test with a strategy of just maximizing their Superscore. They still need to keep their total score in mind, because that will carry greater weight ultimately in the admissions process, and that is what the school will need to report as the GMAT score that then feeds into the class averages, it feeds into rankings, and so on.
Okay, so don't get too complacent knowing that you can have the best scores put into that top line Superscore.
Yeah.
And so just to argue devil's advocate for a little bit, I hope you will anyway, Maria.
Why me?
The other person here is an counselor. Does it, in a way, does it show schools that candidates maybe have more grit if they're willing? I mean, provided they're not bombing sections left and right. Does it show schools that, this is a person who's willing to take this test like 4 times over?
Yes, look, I've heard that theory presented many times, that, well, at least if you've taken it multiple times, you show that you have tenacity. But I think Caroline is spot on that all else being equal, you're much better off. It's much more impressive to just do really well once, or maybe the second time after a certain point. Yeah, so I'm going to play devil's advocate against the devil's advocate. My whole thing, when people are like, oh, but if I take it again, it'll show tenacity, I ask myself, well, why didn't you prepare this hard the first time around? Like, I start to question someone's judgment. Did they not take it seriously the first time? Did they not realize that this test is hard? Did they not study in advance? For me, if someone says like, well, I took it and I got a really low score, so I'm going to retake and show them how hard I work, I'm like, well, but ideally you would have worked that hard the first time, right? So look, it's better than nothing. As long as whatever it takes for you to get to that score where your candidacy will at least be given more of a serious consideration, then great, go for it if you take it 3 or 4 times. Although I do think that studies show that after about the 3rd or 4th time, there's almost never a meaningful improvement. So go ahead and take it. But, I was relieved to hear Caroline say something that I had been a little concerned, and I was not actually thinking that any AdCom would fall for this Superscore shenanigan, because, it would be so easy for someone to only study for one section, show up, take that section, take a nap for the rest of it, and then ace it, and then do the same thing with another section a month later. So, I do think that some people out there who may not be thinking strategically, they might be tempted to do that, to try to game things. So I hope that the schools, if they are going to comment on this, they do sort of indicate that, look, it's great, it's a data point, but we're already mentally super scoring kind of in our heads, and we're going to look at the whole picture. I was also relieved to see that you cannot simply send your super score and nothing else. It accompanies your other score reports. So you cannot, in fact, game it, because part of what makes the test difficult is not just the content on it, but it is the speed and the endurance that it's testing as well. So if a bunch of people suddenly only take half of the test, it's not fair to everyone else. So I don't know. Net, it's fine if it helps some people look a little bit better at first glance. Wonderful. But I do think that admissions officers are not that. I think that they're a bit more savvy than perhaps some candidates give them credit for. And so I don't think that they will be fooled by a amazing Superscore but lousy individual tests.
Yeah, I mean, you've kind of made me think of a related theoretical question here, which is, why couldn't GMAC simply structure the test so that it comes in three different sections, which you take each on a separate day? I mean, would that really be testing without that? Would it not have enough rigor? Caroline, in some universe where this were three separate tests, do you think that that wouldn't actually gauge candidate skills as well?
Well, I think there's an element of stamina to be able to get through the full test in one sitting is a bit different from taking it in separate sections. So it's quite a long test. I can't remember the exact duration now. It's like 2.5 hours or something. So it does take some stamina to prepare for that and then sit the test. And if you break it down, then I think schools might have some concern about people's attention spans and abilities to focus for a sufficient duration of time. So I think schools probably prefer to see a bundled test rather than separated out into individual sections. And I would also add that I believe that Harvard, so some schools, Harvard, Stanford, and Columbia, we've seen have put on the websites that they do not superscore. So I don't know if that's something that they've added recently in the light of this policy, or if that's something they already had on their website. But I think that they just wanted to spell out that the individual score from one sitting is still the most important data point, right? And as I said, schools have always looked through the history of test taking, and they will have been pleased to see if you have reached a certain threshold on individual elements of the test. But at the end of the day, they want to see that you have done well on one sitting, and that individual total will be the score that's reported.
And I'm just looking on the GMAT website, and they list some examples of how a superscore might be used in admissions. So we might have covered some of these, but a candidate's. So we've talked about a candidate being and entering into the business school, but and about stamina, but also they mention here providing context for future admission and waitlist considerations, and also assessing some additional piece of information to support scholarship decisions. Can you speak to those a little bit, Maria?
I mean, yeah, I don't know how this is. I guess because as Caroline mentioned, this can't be the official score that goes into the student profiles that gets related to the ACSB or the governing bodies, or so. I don't know if the school, like normally merit scholarships are oftentimes related to, or they correlate positively with a high GMAT score or getting off of the wait list. If there are two fairly identical candidates on the wait list and one submits a higher score while they're on the wait list, that might help nudge things in one direction or another. But that was already in existence. So the super score is because it's sort of a cosmetic score and not a foundational, it's kind of like the window dressing, but it's not the foundation of the building. It's just the exterior, decoration. So I mean, look, like I think we said to bring it back to the beginning, it's better than nothing. It's fine. It's neutral to positive, but I would not imagine that an admissions office is going to suddenly, be like, oh, the wool has been pulled over our eyes by this super score. I give the good folks in admissions way more credit than that. So but I also think that look, GMAC is if to the extent that this helps encourage more people to do some retakes, because the GMAT is, I believe, the slightly harder test versus the GRE. So if it helps people not be so afraid of it, then I think it's ultimately positive, but it's not like a slam dunk for candidates.
Got it.
Rightfully so.
And one other question here. So I'm curious, in both your experience, how many times on average have you seen candidates take the GMAT? And also, what's the extreme end of things for taking it many, many times? Caroline, What have you seen?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the average is. I would say a lot of people take it more than once. So taking it 2 or 3 times is quite common. Beyond that, it's less common, although I have seen candidates take it far more times than that. But as Maria said, often people kind of plateau at certain point, so not necessarily a benefit to keep taking it and make a hobby of retaking the GMAT. What about you, Maria?
Definitely find better hobbies, right?
I mean, there are many better hobbies. Pretty much any hobby, in fact. Yeah, I think 2 is probably the average if I had to guess, sort of like the most people probably take it twice. I would assume that at the more elite schools like the INSEADs of the world, it's probably more of a one time. A lot of people probably take it super seriously, and so they probably do quite well the first time. So between 1 to 2 times, I would guess. But then for other scores or other schools, I should say, where people, I don't know, the candidates might not be taking it as seriously, then 2 to 3 times does tend to be more seen more often. But yeah, sometimes people take it 8, 9 times. And I think that is usually, unfortunately, they are just wasting their time and money because they either plateau or at a certain point, again, like not to be judgmental, but at its root, at some point in an admissions role, you have to be judgmental. If someone takes it 9 times and it takes them 2 years and 9 attempts to finally get that high score, I don't know that I put as much credence into that high score, because I ask myself, well, how many thousands of dollars in tutoring did they spend? How much, is this they're not going to get 2 whole years to take accounting or to take finance in business school, right? So if it takes them that long to get that high score, to me, that high score doesn't mean as much. It's the same thing like when people quit their jobs in some places, they'll be like, I'm quitting my job to study for the GMAT. And I'm like, that's awful, because now your score, even if you do really well, everyone else is working full time and getting those scores. So now it makes your high score seem a little bit less impressive because you weren't working. So
Oof. So they've got to do it in the early hours of the morning when their children are asleep and their job is finished. Cool, Maria. Very cool.
Paula doesn't like the sound of that.
I don't know. Like,
I'm
that's
envisioning myself,
the job.
as you can see, taking this test. Is like, All right. Well, I mean,
start giving Paula nightmares.
I know. Sorry.
I think, though, I mean, you came back to another thing, which I think is a really good issue to underline, and that is access. So obviously, we've mentioned, this is helpful if you're GMAC, but for candidates, you do have to devote a certain amount of resource to retaking this test and taking it in the first instance. But and beyond that, as Maria, you just said, if you're investing in, in help to prepare, that's additional funding, obviously, that requires. Any final parting words on the Superscore tests into B school, Caroline?
Yeah, so one thing I was thinking about, and you mentioned some of the points that GMAT had given for how it could be taken into account by admissions. And I can see how, for example, supposing you have 2 candidates who both have lower than average total GMAT scores, but one of them has taken the test 2 or 3 times and has a higher Superscore, right? Which means that they have reached a higher threshold on one part of the test, at least, than the other candidate who has the same total score in one sitting. So you could imagine a scenario where that candidate with that higher Superscore has a slight advantage on the margins because they have demonstrated that they have reached a certain threshold on more parts of the test than the other candidate who they're being compared with. So that could potentially play into admissions decisions or scholarship decisions, but it's a very small detail. And also, as we've said, schools have always looked across the history of test taking in any case. It is also possible that in the past, some candidates may not have submitted the full history of test taking. So as I was saying, I've always encouraged candidates, if they have taken the test more than once and they've had a strong quant score on one test and a strong verbal score on another test, I've encouraged them to submit both of those tests. But it can happen that candidates do not submit both of those tests because they're afraid that one of the tests won't look so good because the total isn't great, or they bombed one part of the test, right? So for those candidates where they perhaps didn't have the best strategy as regards selecting the test scores that they would submit to the school, for them, the Superscore could be a positive thing, because now the schools will actually see, oh, he actually did reach this certain level on data insights, even though that's not apparent in the one test that he has selected to submit to the school. So I think in a few cases it could be of benefit to the candidate.
All right, Maria, parting words.
This is a nice cosmetic benefit that will dress up your total score report. But please give admissions officers credit and for being smart, savvy folks, and don't assume that you can try to use this to now game the system to optimize for your Superscore while taking the test twice and tanking one section each time. They're not going to fall for it, so please don't use that as your strategy.
All right. And that is it, folks, on the Superscore. So we're out of time, but please come back next week if you liked our podcast, and also check out poetsandquants.com. Thank you so much to my co-hosts, Maria and Caroline. I am off to go watch some comedy, as they know now. Or had you read my email, Maria, you would know.
No, I knew you had a date night, but I guess I missed I was so excited for you that you had a date night that my brain skipped over the comedy show part of it, because I know how rare that is when you have a toddler. I remember those days.
What are you, before we go, finally, what are you both off to do? Caroline, where are you headed after this?
Well, I have to log on for a kid's medical appointment, but then I have a lot of meetings this afternoon, but planning to make blackberry ice cream with my kids tonight, because we went blackberry picking at the weekend. It was kind of fun. So got a great bounty of blackberries in the fridge to make something with.
That is awesome. That is like top marks for that answer. Maria, what exciting things await you in New York?
It's not as cool as homemade blackberries. I'm gonna go see. My husband got us tickets to see, I guess, the Rocky Horror Picture Show is doing some sort of a theatrical thing in off Broadway tomorrow night, and then of course over the weekend, it's the Colombia Portugal Group K World Cup game. So obviously I am rooting for Colombia, and I don't know that they're going to win, but I certainly hope they will. By the time this comes out, we'll already know the result, but they're number one in my heart. In my heart.
Go Colombia.
Go Colombia, go Cafeteros, even if, Saturday doesn't go, even if Cristiano Ronaldo stomps on their faces in their dreams.
Well, fingers.
He has a history of doing that to other teams, so.
That sounds like a great evening and weekend, even if it doesn't include blackberry ice cream, which I now want to. So thank you so much to my co-hosts, and to wrap it up, thank you everyone for listening.